What's up, everybody? I'm Derek. This is Rocking eForge, and it has been insanely busy the last couple of weeks, so I really haven't had time to film a video, which is why I wasn't able to post anything last week. And this week, I am trying to bridge the gap by posting a compilation video of my Blacksmithing on a Budget series from way on back on TikTok. So I hope you enjoy this compilation. Please let me know if you saw me on TikTok when I was still posting there, and let me know what you think in the comment section. So let's get rocking.
So you want to get into blacksmithing, but maybe you don't know where to start, or maybe you don't have a lot of funds. Let me give you some tips and see if we can get into blacksmithing together. Go to Harbor Freight and get yourself a $10 engineer's hammer, or something like a 3-pound crossbeam hammer if you think that'll be more useful. Get yourself some files. Will it be perfect? Not by any means, but it'll do, right? Now, when you get this hammer back home, what you want to do is what we call dress the face of the hammer. You want a rounded surface. Now remember when I told you to pick up some files? Presuming that you don't have access to some sort of grinder, this is how you're going to dress your hammer face. And this is going to be pretty hard, right? So this is hardened steel. So this is going to take quite a while. You do not need fancy equipment. You don't need a $150 to $200 hammer to get into blacksmithing. Now if you do take this to a grinder, if you have an angle grinder or a belt grinder or something to that effect, be careful. Make sure not to heat the face of the hammer too much, because if these get hot because of the friction, they'll ruin the temper and it'll be like using just a piece of steel. That's what I've done with the hammerhead. Rounded off the corners around the face and gave it a bit of a polish. And I've rounded this face to be a little more spherical. Now you can tell there's still some heavy scratches in there, right? I didn't do a perfect job, and is this a perfect hammer? By no stretch of the imagination. But what it is a usable hammer that I spent $10 and a bunch of time on. I'm going to show you this is a perfectly usable hammer, and if the head flies off, then I apologize, and it's not a perfectly usable hammer. The biggest thing when learning to blacksmith isn't the tools, it's the technique. As you can see, it is perfectly possible to forge the kind of stuff you ought to make and strive to perfect as a beginner. So you want to get into blacksmithing, but maybe you don't know where to start, or maybe you are on a limited budget. This week, I'm covering anvils and anvil-shaped objects. And needless to say, there's a lot of difference between this railroad track and this 125-pound anvil. The biggest difference you're going to see between an anvil and pretty much any anvil-shaped object is the rebound. And that's because anvils are made to do their job. High-quality anvils have hardened faces, good geometry, a lot of mass, good rebound to be used for their intended purpose. You're not going to find almost any of that with any anvil-shaped object. That said, anvils tend to cost a pretty penny, and just like the hammer we talked about in my last video, there are other options that might better fit your budget, and that is what this is all about. So what are those other options? There's effectively as many options as you can even imagine. I've seen people use sledgehammers. I've heard of people using the tines of a forklift. I've heard of people using large, flat-sided dumbbells. I've seen people use just large chunks of steel. There are people that use rocks, believe it or not. Now, I'm no geologist, so I don't know what type of rock would be best suited, but any hard, flat surface that you can make work is gonna work for you until you can afford something better. And this is a chunk of railroad track. I was given this by my grandfather, and this is what I started with. It's very common to be used as a beginner anvil or anvil substitute. I cannot stress this enough, do not steal from the rail service. The last time
I showed you something pretty small, just a little ass hook. This time I'm going big. I really should start scripting my videos, but you can in fact go to Harbor Freight, go on Amazon, find really inexpensive anvils, not to the same level of quality as a nice anvil that you can find recommendations from other blacksmiths, but they are usable. Go for it. Cost shouldn't hold you back from starting the fundamentals.
So you want to get into blacksmithing, but maybe you don't know where to start, or maybe you're on a budget.
So I've talked about hammers, I've talked about anvils, now we're going to get into budget forges. There's two key types of forge, some form of gas burning forge, and then a coal forge. Now I know what you're probably thinking. I don't have $300 to spend on a forge. There are in fact other ways to heat steel. Now you can use something like a bath gas torch. It's going to take way more time than a fully enclosed forge is, but it gives you something to work with. Now something you can do to trap that heat is make your own little paint can forge or soup can forge. It'll work. I used this forge to heat treat the blade on a little neck knife, so it is entirely possible to get up to relatively high temperatures with this setup. If you're able to afford it, this is the Mr. Volcano 2-burner forge kit that you can buy on Amazon for $130. The 1-burner version of this, which is perfectly sufficient for learning the basics of blacksmithing, is $88. From all of the blacksmithing groups and the forums that I've read, this is a very good forge for the money. Now, as far as coal forges go, I don't have a ton of experience, but I can tell you what I've seen. This is a very large coal forge. Now, most people wouldn't need anything this big, especially for beginner projects. It's similar to making an anvil-shaped object work, is you're limited by your creativity in creating some sort of firebox. I've seen a lot of people use brake drums from big pickup trucks or 18-wheelers. There's always the option of digging a shallow pit or trough and providing some way to force air underneath it and covering that with coals. Don't break your HOA rules. As far as the motive force of making the fire hotter, hand crank blowers work super well. They're literally built for it. I've seen people use hair dryers, leaf blowers. So like I said, it's really about getting creative when it comes especially to building your own coal forge. And you can get very creative in building propane forges as well.
You want to get into blacksmithing, but maybe you don't know where to start, or maybe you're on a limited budget. Now this is Blacksmithing on a Budget Part 4. Today we're going to talk about alternatives to tongs. We're going to talk about tong blanks that you can buy online and show you how you can make a pair of tongs yourself. Now tongs are an indispensable tool in the blacksmith shop. You can get by without them, strictly because you can generally get pieces of steel that you can forge things out of that are long enough to hold on to until you're ready to cut them off of whatever stock you're using, at which point you need a pair of pliers or something. But for those times where you have a piece of steel that is too short to hold on to, you need a pair of tongs. So, what are the alternatives if you are on a budget? Now, it's not ideal, but you can use a pair of locking pliers set to the size of steel that you want to forge, and as long as this doesn't get too hot and deform when you clamp down on it with the pliers, this is a good enough solution if you just need a onesie-twosie plier use here and there. Now, tongs are certainly not the most expensive tool. This pair of Wolf Jaw tongs I bought for like $50, $55. But a great alternative to that is buying a set of ready-made tong blanks from online retailers like Ken's Custom Iron. That's where I bought these, and it cost me, I think it was like $13. You'll need a punch. If you don't have a punch, a round punch to punch a hole, shameless plug, go check out my Etsy. I sell them
specifically made for punching steel. You can go check out my videos and make one yourself, but you will need a pair of tongs to make them. These tong blanks are great, and I'll show you forging these out and putting these together in a separate video. This is a great option, very inexpensive. You have to put in some work. The glaring issue is that that's not very long. If you're heating way up to here to forging temperatures, this is going to be way too hot to hold on to. You kind of need a pair of tongs to hang on to your tong blanks. These reins would be long enough by themselves to forge the jaw, and that's a decent length. So you could probably get away with forging the jaw, punching the hole, and then just grinding this down to shape. But something I can tell you you don't need a pair of tongs for, and it's just going to take you more time, is my next recommendation. Forge your own pair of tongs from a long enough piece of rebar that until you cut and want to do all of the true fit up and stuff, you can hang on to get the rest of this. So you want to get into blacksmithing, maybe you don't know where to start, or maybe you're on a limited budget. I want to preface this video with the fact that the first 4 parts, the hammer, the anvil, the forge, and a pair of tongs, are all you absolutely have to get into blacksmithing. But having a nice grinder of some sort can be invaluable in a blacksmithing shop. But these can top out over $1,000 for cheap ones. That, for blacksmithing on a budget, is not usually very tenable. So I'm going to give you some alternatives to the multi-$1,000 pieces of equipment that can do a good enough job for when you're just getting into things. You can use things like a 1x30 inch belt grinder, which you can pick up for on the order of $70 to $200. These are very simple, the belts are pretty cheap. They also are much fiddlier than a 2x72. A 2-inch belt gives you a lot more control, avoids seesawing across the platen. But if this is what you're able to work with, it will totally do what you need it to. Now, you can accomplish the same tasks and then some with a cheap angle grinder. You can pick these up at most hardware stores. I would recommend getting a corded design. They're usually cheaper. You don't want to be in the middle of grinding or cutting something and have the battery die. I know by personal experience how annoying that can be. Now, while you can buy stone grinding wheels, flat disc sanders, etc. for an angle grinder, you can also get cut-off discs, wire wheels, and any number of other attachments that can accomplish the goals of many tools put together into one. And bang for your buck will likely be one of the most versatile tools in your toolbox. Now, I would argue the angle grinder is probably the most dangerous tool in my toolbox as well. These discs are fairly brittle and can break down and fling shrapnel at extremely high speed. Do not remove your guards. Follow all the safety precautions in your manual, and all around, please be safe. Now, if you can't get your hand on one of these, can't afford it, whatever, my next recommendation will help out, hopefully. Make do with hand files. I spent a long time using just a simple double cut bastard file, half rounded file, round files, chainsaw files, etc., and it will do just fine for you. You don't need a fancy grinder to do 90% of what you want to do as a blacksmith. The only thing that those grinders are going to give you is the ability to churn things out really fast, and they're cheap. Now, to pair with your files, I would recommend to make yourself a filing jig. So those are my recommendations for ways to accomplish the same goals that a belt grinder will let you accomplish on a budget.
And that is going to do it for this compilation. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, or ring that notification bell. If you want to support me in the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video. Or please consider becoming a member on my YouTube channel. And as always, keep on rocking.